The Vessel That Drinks Three Oceans. Chapter 1. Monday, with no schedule. The brass gear in her left coat pocket had warmed to body temperature, which meant her hand had been in there for some time without her registering it. The teeth pressed into the pad of her thumb in their familiar arrangement, 24 of them around the rim, the slight burr at the gap where a pinion had once meshed and worn the metal smooth. Her thumb had found that gap on its own. The hand was older at this than the rest of her. She pulled it out of the pocket and made a fist around nothing. 6 years on Rue du Bourg, and the apartment had never looked quite like this from inside at 7:20 on a Monday. Kitchen quiet, the coffee in the cup gone past hot, to drinkable, to lukewarm, while she stood at the window watching a baker she had passed every morning roll out an awning 2 buildings down, the mechanical groan of the awning arm, the weighted hem striking the iron railing, a dog somewhere lower in the street with 3 short barks, then nothing, a child somewhere above, the high indistinct vowel of complaint that meant a coat was being put on against resistance, the acoustic geography of a steep Swiss city, sound arriving from different elevations, the ear sorting by height before sorting by source. She had learned this by living in it. As a watchmaker, she had learned to listen to things that needed sorting. The workshop was 3 floors below the apartment, 6 steps out the front door. A narrow stone room that had been at various recorded points, a cobbler's shop, storage for a restaurant long since closed, and according to the original lease, a room for carnival costumes. She had kept the lease for that last detail. The room now smelled of clock oil and walnut polish, and the mineral dryness of fine brass filings, a smell unpleasant only until you had earned it, which she had gradually, over many years of sitting close to small things. The workshop was closed this week, painter coming Tuesday. 2 pocket watch movements waited on the blue velvet mat under the glass dome that kept off the dust. She had told herself this was about the fumes. It was not about the fumes. The list was on the table. New insoles for her winter boots. Call her sister back. The photography exhibition at the Musée de l'Élysée she had been meaning to see since August. 3 items written the night before in pencil on the back of an envelope. And looking at them, she had felt the weight of the time around them rather than the weight of the tasks themselves. The unscheduled hours waiting to be filled by a person who had forgotten how. There was nothing to repair. That was the actual problem. The coat went on. The brass gear went into the left pocket where it always lived, small and cold, and finding the same place in the lining it had worn smooth with 18 months of finding. Down the stairs, out into the cobbled street where the air had committed to autumn, but the leaves on the plane trees had not. The descent to Ouchy took about 20 minutes on foot. She preferred the walk to the funicular on mornings like this because of how sound changed as the elevations changed, pigeons and quarter-hour bells, and stone returning stone in the upper city. Lower, the edges softening, more water in the air. By the time the lake came into view, the city had become a hum at her back, and ahead of her there was only the slow lap of Léman against the harbour walls, patient and rhythmic, like breathing in a room where someone is sleeping. The mist was heavier than the forecast had suggested. It sat on the harbour the way mist sits on open water, complete, settled, belonging fully to the surface it rested on. Half the world had gone white. The stone walkway under her boots, the iron railing, the first several meters of each berth. Present. Past that, white. The amber lights of the Café de la Paix along the promenade hung suspended in it like small contained fires. The teak of the nearest paddle steamer glistened. The ropes dripped. The air tasted of cold and stone and the faint mineral residue of the lake. At Berth 1, the Itali rode dark and silent. At Berth 2, the curve of the Simplon's hull through the mist. She had made this walk enough times to know each steamer by its silhouette before she could read a nameplate, and on a morning this thick, the silhouettes were what she had. At Berth 3, her steps stopped on their own. The shape there was wrong. A long pause while the eyes worked. The hull was a darker dark than any CGN paint, the color of wood that has been in water long enough to absorb it rather than resist it. The planks ran wide and were fitted without any visible fastening she could find. Each plank carried its grain at a slightly different angle from its neighbor, so the surface of the hull had a slow movement in it, like a field of long grass when the wind turned the blades. Her eyes searched for the place where the movement stopped. There was no such place. Two narrow funnels, blackened bronze. From each one rose coils of vapor that were not smoke, clean blue-white, curling into perfect rings that floated through one another without breaking. One ring climbed past her into the mist and was gone. Another formed beneath it with the same intention. A faint blue glow ran along the waterline. Approaching to be sure she was seeing it at all, she watched it pulse, slow, the long, even pulse of something biological. The porthole windows were round, brass-rimmed, lit from within. Not yellow, amber, warm and still. She came alongside a bow and found the nameplate at the prow. Brass. Raised lettering, dark with age. L'ailleurs. Twice she read it. The French was plain enough. Elsewhere. A narrow boarding ramp had been laid against the hull, plain wooden planks unattended. At the top, a small brass plaque, mounted where a steward might have stood with a manifest in hand. She stepped onto the first plank to read it. The story she gave herself, while doing so, was that she was only stepping onto the first plank to read it. Montes. On attend. Come aboard. Someone is waiting. Her thumb pressed the brass gear through the wool of her pocket. The teeth bit into the pad. She turned and looked back across the harbour, the Itali at Berth 1 still silent, the dock lamps burning amber through the white, the city up the hill carrying on with its morning. The workshop closed, the kitchen list on the table, the two unfinished movements waiting under their glass dome on the blue velvet mat. She counted the planks going up. 3, 6, 9. The 9th plank gave way to deck. The teak under her boots was dry and gave very slightly the way old teak gives, which is not softness but depth. The response of a surface that has carried weight a long time and has learned to receive it. The deck was wider than the hull from outside had suggested it would be. Filing this away in the part of the mind reserved for later, she crossed to the salon door. It opened inward without resistance. Sound first. A 2-beat clicking, rhythmic, the unmistakable sound of knitting needles on a project that had been in progress for some considerable time. Beneath that, the very fine scratch of pen on paper. No voices, no music. the breathing of a room that held several people and was nonetheless entirely without noise, the way a library is quiet, the way a workshop is quiet, not the absence of presence, but the presence of concentration. Then warmth, then the smell. Teak and mineral oil first, and beneath them something else she had caught from the dock and could now place, the interior of an old atlas. Paper that had been turned by many hands in many places over many years. The smell of accumulated distance. Oil lamps in brass brackets along the walls. The amber she had seen from outside, warm and still, and breathing steadily, exhaling its light rather than projecting it. The ceiling vaulted, panelled in sections of wood that graduated from pale gold near the edges to walnut at the centre, fitted into rosettes. At the centre of each rosette, a small round clock. Counting them happened on its own. 11. Then more. The ceiling went back further than the eye had at first allowed. Every clock was running. None of them agreed. She was still looking up when the room's other occupants resolved. At a corner table, an old man in a dark grey wool suit sat bent over a sheet of paper. The pen moved in long continuous strokes. His were the hands of someone who had been writing for a very long time. The kind that hold a pen, not by gripping it, but by knowing exactly where it is at every moment. Near the window, a woman in a long dark green dress was knitting, the needles clicking at intervals, so even they might have been mechanically produced. Long red hair, loosely tied. Her stillness had the quality of someone uninterested in anything outside the work in front of her. Against the far wall, a young woman in a denim jacket stood with her back to the room, looking out one of the porthole windows. Both hands cupped a small glass bottle. None of them looked up. From the corridor at the back of the salon, a boy stepped in. 12, perhaps, in a white high-collared shirt and grey trousers. Straight black hair cut across the brow. His step was very quiet on the teak. At the middle of the room, he stopped. The look he gave her communicated, without any room for misreading, that he had been expecting this moment and that it had arrived on schedule. The brass gear had pressed into her thumb hard enough to leave a row of small marks. The teeth pressed a cool count into the pad. 1, 2, 3, 4. The boy nodded. Not a greeting. A nod that meant something specific, that communicated, without any room for misreading, that he had been expecting this moment and that it had arrived on schedule. A subtle redistribution of weight. The vessel had stopped resting against the dock and become something else. The salon floor adjusted itself fractionally beneath her boots, the way a deck adjusts when a vessel takes its own water under it, settling into the proper line of its own buoyancy. She turned to the nearest porthole. The harbour was receding, or she was. In the white outside, the brass-rimmed glass, the amber lights of the Café de la Paix had begun to soften further, becoming smaller, becoming the suggestion of warmth rather than the source of it. The promenade lamps thinned to spaced points and then to no points. The mist closed over the place she had walked across to come here, and the place she had walked across no longer had a visible existence. The salon held its breath. The needles continued. The pen continued. The boy stood where he had stood. Her thumb found the gear in her pocket. 24 teeth, the small burr at the gap, the cold of the brass already returning where her hand had warmed it. A door opened somewhere further forward in the ship. Soft footsteps approached the salon along the corridor. Whoever was coming walked the way people walk in their own house early in the morning before anyone else is up, at a pace that was their pace, expecting nothing. The footsteps stopped at the threshold. She did not yet turn.